at this point of time in chapter 5 onwards, you will see King David being made the king over all Israel.
在这时候，在第5章，我们会看到大卫已经被按立成为这个以色列的王。
Now look at chapter 5, verse 2. The people came to David and they spoke with him.
第5章第2节说到，那些人来到大卫面前，也跟他说话。
Now chapter 5, verse 1 actually. Then came all. Why don't we read in English and Chinese together? Chapter 5, verses 1 to verses 4.
第5章第1到第4节中英文一起来读。
Reading. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. And in time past, when Saul was king over us, there was he that led us out and brought us in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king, to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. Now entitled today's message, David, a man stepping up to his task.
今天这个信息的题目是大卫一个敢于承担责任的男人。
Now all the while David was made king, but he did not rule the entire Israel.
这一直以来，大卫都是王，只是他没有掌管整个以色列。
We saw that the last time.
上次我们看过，
But at this point, God will bring him to a point where he is going to be anointed king over all Israel.
在这时候，神会使他按立成为这个整个以色列的王。
David is going to face his first test as king of the entire Israel.
大卫会面对他身为王的这个第一个任务，当他身为王的时候。
Now there will be interesting lessons for us to learn when God put us in a certain role, in a certain task.
这是一个很有趣的功课，我们要学的。当神将我们放在一个岗位或者任务的时候，
He expects us to step up to it.
他期盼我们能够就是做得好。
How did David respond? How did David behave?
那么大卫他怎样回应？他的态度是怎么样呢？
What were his successes? What were his failures?
他的成功及他失败又是什么呢？
It is for us to learn.
是让我们学习的地方。
You did not become a father
你没有
by chance.
你没有原因的成为一位父亲，
You did not get married by chance.
你不是偶然的就结婚的，
You're not a male by chance.
你不是没有理由偶然的是一个男人，
Growing up to be a man.
或长大成为一个男人。
Now God has planned and God has assigned roles into your life, my life.
神有计划，也将最好的放在你跟我的生命当中。
Whether it's in a family, at work, in church,
无论是在家庭里，或者工作，或者在教会，
in school,
在学校
in，your personal walk.
或者是你个人与神的同行。
We must be always ready to step up, step into the role, and know what the test will be there to face us.
我们必须愿意去做，然后要知道在当中我们的考验是什么，
And not fail.
然后你不会失败。
So we will see some of the very first few things that David will face as king of Israel.
我们会看当大卫成为以色列的王的时候，他所要面对的事情。
When you become a father, when you become a husband, when you grow up, you will face tests.
当你成为父亲长大的人等，你会要面对考验。
We must not fail.
我们不应该失败。
Turn to chapter 5 now, verses 6 to verse 7.
我们来翻开第5章第6到第7节。
Now King David now is going to move, and he wants to move into Jerusalem.
大卫王现在他要搬到这个以色列去。
Now Jerusalem is on a hill.
以色列是在一个山上，
It's a very good position,
是一个很好的地位，
especially when people want to attack it.
特别是在有人要攻打它，
There is natural defense, higher ground.
它是在一个高地方，所以它有很自然的防守。
Now David would now want to move his place of ruling to Jerusalem, and that is God's will for him too.
大卫现在要将他统治的地方带到以色列去，也是神的旨意。
By this point, the Jebusites were occupying Jerusalem.
可是这时候，这个耶布斯人他在占领着这个耶路撒冷。
Now, when he went there, the Jebusites made fun of him, laughed at him.
当他去到那里的时候，耶布斯人他嘲笑他。
But David was able to defeat them and took Jerusalem.
可是大卫他能够打败他们，然后也占领那地方。
That is in verse 10. And David went on and grew great, and the Lord of hosts was with him.
是在第10节可以看到说到大卫日渐强盛，因为耶和华万军之神与他同在。
This will be one of his first successful campaign to take the capital city as king.
这个是他第一个身为王的时候所成功达到的一个目标，当他占领的这个地方的首都。
And then after that in verse 11,
然后之后在11节，
the king of Tyre further up north.
这个在北部的这个
Tyre.
王。
Let's read 11 and 12 together.
我们来读11、12节一起。
And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David an house. And David perceived that the Lord has established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. Now, the king from far away, he heard about David, and he decided to send materials and actually provide the building for David's palace.
这里他们在远处就听到关于大卫，然后他们愿意供应给他这些材料来建造。
Why did he do that?
为什么他们这么做呢？
Of course, to him, this is a great opportunity to build political relationship.
当然，对于他们这是最好的机会，能够与大卫建立这个政治上的这个关系，
Hoping to improve trade and whatever political benefits.
希望能够进步在他们交易上或者是一切政治上的事情。
So David stepped in to be king, and then he experienced all these successes.
所以大卫成为王，然后他就尝到这些的成功。
And please look at verse 12.
请看第12节。
God says David perceived, all right, he noticed, he knew in his heart that the Lord has established him king over Israel.
圣经说耶和华圣经说他建立，就是说他知道他要统领这个以色列。
I ask you question number 1.
我问你第一题，
What did David perceive? What do we learn from this regarding God calling us, assigning us to tasks or roles?
那么大卫他追求的是什么呢？我们又从当中借着神的呼召，我们或者是我们的任务当中，我们可以学习到什么？
So, very straightforward. He perceived that God has made him king.
很直接的，他建立的就是说神使他成为王。
Now, of course, he knew that God has told him, You will be king of Israel.
当然他知道神跟他说他会成为以色列的王。
Of course, he knew that people came and made him king.
当然他知道这些人来要使他成为王。
But you know, all this while, his life has been very difficult, things change in the last minute.
在这之前，他的生活很艰难，然后在一瞬间，他的生活改变了。
But at this point, with all these smooth successes, with Saul removed, with successful campaigns to take the capital city, and with other kings now actually coming to him, he knew that this is the time.
他谈到这些成功，然后他顺利的占领了这个首都，然后这些王他们也来到他面前，他知道这是时候。
Now the Bible tells us he perceived. So, as men, as husbands, as fathers, we must not be ignorant. When something happened, I got married. We must be conscious. A child is in my wife's stomach. We must be conscious.
圣经说到他经历，所以身为一男人的我们好像说我们要做父亲，或者是当有孩子要出生的时候，我们应该要很小心。
We must perceive that God is bringing some things into place in our lives.
我们要坚立知道神将事情带入我们的生活。
It could be in church. You perceive that God is beginning to use you in some areas.
在教会，也许神要建立你，使你在某个岗位上使用你。
For the teenagers, we perceive that you are growing into manhood.
对年轻人，我们建立，因为要成为了成年人。
Now David was conscious what was happening.
大卫很清醒的知道发生什么事。
Now I ask you this question. You look at this verse and think very carefully.
现在我问你这个问题，然后你看这一节，然后很仔细的想。
King David says, I have become king. Finally.
大卫王说：“我最终已经成为了王。”
Maybe he said, I'm finally going to be a father.
说我终于要成为父亲。
Or I am a father.
或者是我已经是一位父亲。
I'm a husband.
我是一位丈夫。
David said, I am king now.
大卫说：“我现在已经是王了。”
Look at verse 12.
我们来看12节。
I asked the question, what do you learn about David's statement? I have become king.
我问这个问题，就是说当大卫说我成为了王的时候，你从他可以学习到什么？
Anyone?
有没有人？
What was in his mind when he said, I have become king?
当他说我已经成为王的时候，他在脑海中在想什么呢？
I become father, I become husband.
我已经成为了父亲或丈夫。
So Jin, what do you think was in his mind when he said that?
你觉得当他说那句话的时候，他在想什么？
Look at the verse.
我们来看那一节。
That God has given him the responsibility, yes, good. Well, first of all, he realized God has given me responsibility.
书经说神已经给他这个责任好的是我们首先要知道神给我们这个责任。
There's a task, there's a role.
有这个任务，有这个岗位。
But what else was on his mind?
可是还有什么？他是在想
Ben.
That was for God's will for his Israel's sake.
It was for God's will for Israel's sake. How do you know that?
Ben 说是神的旨意，为这以色列缘故。然后牧师就问你怎么样知道呢？
From the last part of the verse, it says, exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake.
Very good. Let's read the second part of verse 12.
我们来读第12节的第二部分。
And that he hath exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. Now here, David is not simply saying, wow, wonderful, I have become king.
这里大卫不是单单就说是很好的，我已经成为了王。
That is not his only perception.
这不是单单他所想要的。
What came through his mind is that God did this for a reason.
那么他所想的就是神使这一切发生是有他原因。
God gave me a responsibility, God gave me a task, God gave me a role, and there is a reason.
神给我责任岗位等是有原因的。
That God intends, or God has already exalted, lifted up his kingdom, and for his people's Israel's sake, not for David's sake.
神已经兴起他的国度是为了耶路撒冷人的缘故，而不是为了大卫的缘故。
When we are put, or when God moves us into certain capacities in life,
当神使我们能够在生活中做一些事情的时候，
that must be the thought that comes to us, the question that we ask ourselves.
我们所想的应该要问自己的问题是：
Kenny, Chia, why is God giving me a child? Then you say, I'm going to be a father.
为什么神给我一个孩子，然后我要成为父亲？
Then you must, like David, think, because God intends to have his kingdom's work accomplished and his people to benefit.
你必须像大卫这样子想，就是好让他的国度的缘故，然后为着他人民的利益。
You perceive that you're going to be a father soon, right?
既然你这样子，因为你要成为父亲。
Now, same for fathers, same who have children already.
对于父亲或者已经有孩子的是同样。
Now, we cannot just go through life as men, as fathers, as husbands, just, all right, que sera, sera, and this is what it is, this is what it is.
我们身为男人、丈夫或者是父亲的时候，我们不能够说 这事情这样子发生就发生吧。
Some of you are getting married or want to get married.
有些人已经结婚，或者是将要结婚。
David became king of Israel. That was a huge thing.
大卫成为耶路撒冷的王是一个很大的事。
He was not just going out to celebrate.
他不是只是要出去要来庆祝，
He saw successes.
他看到这些成功
He， saw God helping him.
他也看到神如何帮助他。
He wasn't just going to say, now I am going to be king and enjoy my life, but he says, God's people will be exalted. His people, everything that God does from here on, me as king, is for his people.
他不是说当完就好了，他是说在这一段时间开始他所做这些发生的事情都是为着神的缘故，神的旨意。
In other words, he realized that he is merely a what?
换句话说，他知道他只是一个
He is merely a what? What do you think? He is merely an instrument. That is all.
他只是一个器皿，一个工具，只是这样子而已。
Now, don't take this lightly.
不要轻看这一点。
How old was David at this point?
在这时候，大卫几岁呢？
Shane. No, not Shane. Justin. How old?
他几岁？
Never pay attention when you read.
读的时候没有专心。
Ignatius, how old? 30 years old.
30岁，
Who's 30 years old here?
这里谁30岁？
Or close to 30? Or
还是将
30?
近
All right,
30
roughly. Oh, wow.
33 years old.
You're 20 over years away from 30.
你离30岁还有20多年。
Now, he is actually quite a young man.
他其实是一位蛮年轻的年轻人，
A young man stepping into the role as king of entire Israel.
一个年轻人要承担这个统领整个耶路撒冷的王的这个国的王，
King of the army of the living God
这个
on earth.
这个在世的神军队的这个王。
But he was so clear in his heart.
可是他在心里面很清楚，
It's God's purpose. I'm just an instrument. That's all.
是神的缘故，我只是一个器皿。
My friends, maybe you are getting promoted at work or you will get promoted.
朋友们，你在工作上也许要被升职，或者是即将要升职，
What will fill your heart and mind?
在你脑海中你会想什么呢？
Pride?
是否骄傲？
Say, wow, think of all the things that I can do now.
想着我现在可以做的一切事情，
Think of the salary that I will have now.
想象一下我能够得到的工钱。
By that time, kings, you pretty much can do whatever you want.
在那时候，成为一个皇帝，你几乎可以做任何事情。
But he was very conscious.
可是他很小心，
If you're going to have a child,
如果你要有一位小孩，
you must be very conscious this child is for God's kingdom's work.
你必须要很小心，知道这个孩子是为这神的工作。
If you are a father,
如果你是位父亲，
don't feel that I'm a father. Wow, I'm the ruler at home.
不要感到我是一位父亲，然后可以统领一切。
But David knew that he was an instrument for the benefit of God's children.
大卫知道是一个器皿，是为了他神子民的利益。
You're a husband. Some people feel very good. I'm married.
你是一位丈夫，有些人感到很好，因为我已经结婚。
When you step into that role as a husband, you have taken on the responsibility for another life.
当你进入这岗位，身为丈夫的时候，就是说你要对一个新的生命负责。
And the entire, or rather, the reason for God putting you in those roles,
神将你摆在这岗位上的原因是，
purely for His glory.
单单是为了他的荣耀。
David could feel that he's someone special,
大卫也许会感到他是一个很特别的人，
but he did not.
可是他却没有。
Maybe you're asked to take on, to serve in certain roles in church.
也许你被叫去在教会当中担任任何的岗位。
As you step into the role,
当你进入这岗位的
as
时
you
候，
take on responsibilities,
当你要接受这个责任的时候，
this is the lesson we learn from David.
这个是我们从大卫身上学习的功课。
That from now on, I'm an instrument for God to use for His people. That's it.
就是这时候我是神的器皿，为这神子民，
So that's a good start.
这是一个好的开始。
But the question is, are we conscious of those? Do we perceive that?
可是问题是我们是否小心也监理？
Now, then question 2, let's move.
第二题我们来看。
Now, just read question 2 heading first. As a man, as a father, a husband, what do you learn from King David's actions as he stepped into his role as leader of God's people in the following incidences?
第二题就是身为一个男人，一位父亲或者一位丈夫，你从大卫王的身上或者是他的行动中，当他要接受这个神子民的这个领袖的岗位当中，甚至他所面对的这些经历，你从当中学习到什么？
So there are going to be one event after another when he stepped into his role.
一直的会发生很多的事情，当他进入他的岗位的时候，
In rapid succession. In rapid succession.
他一直重复的得到这个成功。
How did David respond? Let's learn.
大卫如何回应？我们来学。
Now, we shall read now verse 13 together.
我们现在一起来读13节。
And David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem after he was come from Hebron. Now, this is the commentary of David's next steps.
这个是记载着大卫接下来做的事情。
I think it's getting a bit hot, right?
我觉得好像有点开始。
Yeah, maybe let's turn back on the aircon.
可能我们就
Maybe turn on the back and
把
the
这个
front.
空调开回去。
And maybe give the Joel a... Okay, thank you. So, I ask you question A, 2A. Now, so what do you learn?
我问你第二 A 你学习到什么？
Taking more concubines and wives.
立更多的妃子及妻子。
Now, this you need to understand the context.
这里我们需要明白他的背景及上下文。
Eugene, what do you learn about him? He became king, then he decided to take more concubines and wives.
你从当中学习到什么？他成为了皇帝，然后他立了很多的妃子。
What was that act about?
他的行动表示什么？
Extend his influence. Correct.
他就是他影响力更多了。
Now, at the time, this is a very common thing, right?
在那时候，这是很普遍的事情。
The king's span of influence, power, is very often measured also by the number of wives he has.
这皇帝他扩展他的影响力，或者是他能力，借着他有多少个妻子。
Some would marry further and further and further to another country even to extend his political influence and relationships.
一些会一直的结婚到，甚至到另外一个国家来扩展他的影响，或者是他的帝国等。
It was the common thing for kings to do at that time.
在那时候的皇帝是很普遍的，当他们做这些事情的时候。
So, what do you learn?
所以你学习到什么呢？
Maybe you say, what do you learn as a father?
也许你可以问一下，就是说，身为父亲，你学习到什么？
Douglas, as a father, what would you learn from David's behavior?
身为父亲，你从大卫的态度当中学习到什么？
This was what kings do.
这个是皇帝做的事情。
What will come to your mind?
那么你想到什么呢？
Not good thing.
I cannot relate the concubines to wives and concubines.
These negative things to learn, not positive.
Oh, negative.
Yes. Definitely negative.
这些是负面的东西。
Not encouraging you to go and take more wives after this Bible study.
我不是鼓励你在这个查经过后去立更多的，
Because we are going to learn from David's good points and areas where he failed.
因为我们要从大卫身上学习他的好的地方及他失败的地方。
You see, God records these things very frankly, so that when you have children, when you are a father, when you become a husband, when you grow up to be a man, then David did this. We must learn not to do it.
神直接的记载这些，是因为当你成为父亲有孩子等你 从这大卫身上学习到东西，然后你不应该做任何东西。
So, what can we learn not to do?
我们可以学习什么不应该做的。
Not become a bad father.
Not to be a bad father, a bad husband. Bad in what sense?
Not in accordance to God's way.
Not in accordance to God's way.
不要成为一个不好的父亲或丈夫，没有按着神的方式。
Yes, God says the king, Israel's king, must not behave like other kings and have many wives.
神说以色列的王不应该有很多的妻子。
But then why did David do it?
可是为什么大卫又这样子做呢？
Right? Maybe
Pride in what sense?
to demonstrate his influence and power.
Demonstrate his influence and power. Very good.
也许他骄傲是为了他能够展示他的影响力或者他的能力。
What was the general principle that you would learn?
我们应该学习的原则是什么？
Anyone?
有没有人？
Vincent? What's the general principle?
我们应该
You
学习。
grew up, become a man.
你长大成为一个男人。
From the principle here. The question is, what's the principle we learn about how David behaved that we should not behave? Why did David behave like that? He was proud. He wanted to demonstrate his influence.
I would think that he's trying to use his own means of retaining the power that God has appointed him with.
Yep. Right? So he feels that this is the way to continue my strength, my power.
And with relation to the second part, I would think that it's so that he would produce heirs
Produce heirs
to the throne.
to make his lineage safe. Now, all these things are what kings of the world do.
他会说要持续他能力，或者是有孩子来承续我的王位，这些东西都是世界上的人会做的
In
事
other
情。
words, as a man, as a father, as a husband,
换句话说，身为一个男人丈夫或父亲，
when God moves us into that role and when we are in that role,
当神使我们进入这个岗位，或者我们已经在这岗位的时候，
we must not see the world does it, it works, and therefore I also do it.
我们不应该看世界的人做，然后他有用，然后我们也去跟。
I kept dropping the hint. This is the way the kings lived at that time.
我一直给这提示，就是说这样子是那时候的皇帝会做的事情。
This is the way husbands in the world live. This is the way fathers live their life. This is the way my adult friends at work, in school live their lives.
这个是现在的丈夫，或者是父亲，或者是我成人的朋友等他们会做的事情。
And therefore, I just do it.
所以我也这样子做了。
This was not a good commentary of David's life.
这个不是一个好的记载关于大卫的生命。
When God moves us into a role, into a task in life,
当神使我们进入一个岗位，或者给我们一个任务的时候，在生活当中，
the first thing is not to see what others do and therefore follow.
首先不是要看其他人在做什么，然后我们也跟。
Well, if it's biblical, great, fine.
如果是符合圣经的话，好，我们可以跟。
There's a great temptation.
有一个很大的诱惑，
When some of you finish your studies, you come out and work.
当一些人他们完成他们的学业，他们出来工作，
Then you're going to observe. This is how the people in office live. This is what they do. This is how they dress. This is what they buy. I also will do that.
你会开始看在公司里面的人他这样子穿着他们做的事情等，然后你也会这样子跟着做。
God may be very merciful. He help you into the job. He help you into the role and gave you everything successfully, like David.
神怜悯的，他向大卫带领你们进入这个岗位这个工作。
David perceived that,
大卫经历了这
but
个，
he failed here.
可是他在这里失败。
Maybe as a husband, the same.
也许对丈夫来说
You get married. Oh, this is how you look at the world. This is how they live their lives. This is what they buy. This is how they organize their priorities. I'll do it also.
你在结婚之后，你也许会看，就是这是他们的要做的事情，他们等等的，然后你说我也要这样子做。
I'm very thankful for many of you. After you got married, you did not break in your pace to get as in serving God.
我很感谢神，因为有些人就是你在结婚过后，你没有就是做了那些好像比较少给神时间的东西。
Same for those that begin to have children. You still continue to serve the Lord, but maybe in different areas
同样的
because of limitations.
同样的，对于那些有孩子的，你还是服侍神，只是因着你的限制，你在其他的岗位上服侍。
But you look around, there be many families, many couples that change.
我们向周围看到很多的伴侣或者是夫妻等，他们
Remember, God gave you a wife.
要记得神赐给你一个妻子，
God gave you children.
神给你一个孩
He
子，
made it all very smooth, like King David,
他像大卫一样，就是使一切事情很顺利的进行。
because He wants you and I to know this is something that God made me into.
然后你我知道就是这个是神使我成为的一个人，
So that's one thing we must learn.
这是一点我们要学习的。
Now, I think the other thing we can notice is probably his marriage isn't too good.
另一点我们可以注意到的，也许他的婚姻不是很好，
He didn't seem to have a biblical marriage model.
他看过去好像没有一个符合圣经的模式。
Say again?
I appreciate your comments about all these things. But are we really being biblical in these interpretations here?
In what sense?
There's nothing which shows he did anything wrong here. I mean, in spite of the original command of the time.
In terms of marrying more wives, is it? Or wrong as in his relationship with his wife?
I do not know. Okay, I'm saying, I mean, certainly in the New Testament, it says what takes more than one wife. Okay? But in the Old Testament, that was permitted. But I mean, when it comes
Does the Old Testament permit Israel kings to take many wives?
anybody is allowed. Okay? See, certainly in case of Solomon, it says he took more wives and he led him astray. But there was no, I cannot recollect any negative comments about David. And David also took wives before he became king.
Yes, correct. Yep. So now, so the question is, there seems to be no negative comments on David taking many wives, right?
问题是似乎好像没有负面的这些回应关于大卫他娶很多的妻子。
But we all agree that God did say his kings must not have many wives, and must not have multiplied horses, right?
可是我们都知道圣经说就是这些王不应该有很多的妻子或者是
and multiply horses. Means have many horses.
就是还有很多匹的马。
Yeah. So that is for sure. God said that. That's very clear.
很肯定的，神说过这些。
And another thing is, then why does God seem to be silent?
第一件事就是为什么神似乎看起来好像没有做什么事情呢？
Now, we have to read the Old Testament narratives as narratives.
我们要看这些旧约为这些对比或者是这些
Narratives means God just state what was happening sometimes without commenting.
意思就是说，神只是列出这些发生的事情，然后没有做出任何的回应。
Like certain instances, God just states, this is what David did, this is what the king of Israel did. He did not comment that it was evil, but it does not mean that God allowed it. God is pleased with them.
好像一些事件说到大卫做这些事情，然后这些看过去似乎是邪恶的，可是不是说神允许他。
Right? So the question is, are you saying that it was okay for David to take many wives, or David's marriage was not good?
I'm not saying anything.
Oh,
I'm saying there's nothing warranted for us to come to a negative conclusion. It's just a matter of fact. Okay?
oh, okay.
There is a specific disobedience against something which God instituted.
Yes. So we turn to Deuteronomy 17:17.
我们翻开《生命记》17章17节。
Commentaries, narratives, very often it's just narrative. God is narrating the story.
这些生命这些只是陈述，就是说到神只是在说一些东西。
So one of the things that God made very clear, the law for the kings.
神很清楚说到对于这些王的这些规矩。
So we read from verses 14 to 17.
我们从14节读到17节，
Reading together.
一起来读。
When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose, one from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee. First rule, which is not thy brother. That's the first rule. Second, but he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, that he should multiply horses. For as much the Lord has said unto you, you shall henceforth return no more that way. Condition number 2 for their kings. Number 3, verse 17, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So now these are the rules that God set for the king.
这些是3条神为这些皇帝所设的规矩。
Yeah, but you're right. You see, very often, and that is the question that always comes up.
很长时候，这个是会人家问的问题。
The multiple wives.
有很多的妻子，
Now, some even think that they thought that these kings were sex maniacs.
有些人甚至会以为这些是性疯狂的人。
It's not that. It has to do with political influence.
不是那样子的，而是因这政治上的影响。
But it happened so to King David, to Solomon. It seemed to happen to all their kings.
是它发生在这个大卫或者是所罗门王看起来好像发生在这些皇帝。
To the point, like we read, like it didn't seem to be bad, right?
到某种程度，我们读起来看过去好像不是坏的事。
But that's the whole point. The kings have become so used to the ways of the world, of other kings.
这些皇帝已经开始习惯其他皇帝做的事情。
Now, that God just said, there they go again. That's it. God didn't even comment.
神只是在那边说他们又做了这些事情，神甚至没有做回应。
Yep. Does that answer your question?
是否回答
All right,
你
good. All right. So yeah, because it's so common. And even we read it, we probably just move on, right? Which is why I stopped there and asked us to think, really think. David has also become like the rest of the kings.
是为什么它是很普遍？所以我们停在这里，让你们想，因为大卫他成了这个王，然后他也做了这些普遍的事情。
All right, good question. Thank you.
这个很好的题目。谢谢
So now, where was I? All right, so now we move on to the attacks. Okay, the attacks.
我们来看他的攻击。
Now, so God began by saying, look, there is David. Now, then he moved on. When the Philistines heard that David was made king over Israel.
当这些非利士人他知道这个大卫王是耶路撒冷的
Verse 17 and 18 told us that the Philistines now gather against him. They gather, 17 and 18,
17、18节说到这些非利士人聚集
they gathered against him.
他们聚集来攻击他。
Now, of course, this is the new king.
这个是新的王，
The Philistines must exert their power, their force, and see whether they can topple this king, right?
非利士人他们必须要用自己的能力，看能不能够打垮这个王。
So very quickly, in stepping into the role, into the task, David will face his first test.
很快的，当他进入这个岗位，他要面对他第一个考验。
Now, please remember this.
请记得这一点。
Kenny having child coming soon.
田你很快就要有孩子，
Some of you have children growing up into teenagers.
有些人有孩子长大要成为
Young people, you grow up into men soon.
年轻人，你要很快就长大成为男人。
Maybe some of you may be serving the Lord in church in certain capacities.
有些人在教会因着他某些的能力在教会服侍。
Please remember,
请记得，
you will face tests.
你会面对考验。
This will be David's first test.
这个是大卫第一个考验。
Always remember when we step into a role, God will allow tests
要记得，当我们进入一个岗位的时候，神会允许一些
to
的考验
prove us, to help us to know our heart.
来使我们证明我们的心。
Like I preached this morning,
像我今天所传讲的，
don't look at things with eyes of flesh and blood.
不要以你的血肉之躯来看东西。
Understand that everything happens for a reason.
要知道每一件事情发生是有它的原因。
I remember even in my ministry,
我记得在我之前的服侍，
When I first entered the ministry,
当我刚刚服侍的时候，
many strange and unexpected things happened to me.
有很多没有想到或者是奇怪的事情发生在我身上。
But every time those things happen, I remember in scriptures
可是当这些事情每次发生的时候，我记得经文里面记载着，
that the people, when God put them into certain ministries, into certain role, very quickly tests will come and they must not fail.
当神将一个人摆在一个岗位，这个考验很快就来，然后他们不能够失败。
Now, if we don't realize that, we will not be conscious and we will fail.
如果我们不知道这一点，我们就会失败。
We must not budge.
我们不应该妥协，
We must be firm.
我们应该站立得稳。
We must make sure we will do all the things that we have learned until that point, because when you step in, it's reality.
我们应该学习，因为到那时候，当我们踏入这一步的时候，是成为事实。
Everything that you learn about what it is to be a husband, what it is to be a father, what it is to be a man, everything that you've learned, when you step into that role, the test will come.
你所学习的一切，你如何成为男人、丈夫或者父亲，当你进入这岗位的时候，这考验一切都会
Now,
来。
at first I thought it was my imagination.
首先，只是我想象出来的东西。
Then I thank God that one of my lecturers, he gave me the exact counsel.
然后感谢神，我一位讲师他给我同样的辅导。
And he said, this is your first test.
他说这是你的第一个考
When your
验。
baby comes,
当你的孩子来的时候，
very soon the test will come.
很快的考验也要来。
Colin is not here. When Colin gets married, very soon the test will come.
Colin 不在这里，当他结婚的时候，这个考验很快。
Young people, you get into university, you get into workplace, the first test will come.
年轻人，当你进入大学或者是工作场所的时候，这个第一个考验会来。
Now let's see how David performed.
我们来看大卫如何表现，
How did David respond?
大卫如何的回应。
Verse 19.
19节，
Let's read together.
一起来读。
And David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said unto David, Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thine hand. Now this is a good lesson.
这是一个很好的功课。
David, first test, he made sure, he knew it was test, he knew that he must have God's help. He prayed.
大卫第一个考验，他知道他一定要有神的帮助，他也祷告。
He prayed.
他祷告，
Now as a husband, as a father,
身为丈夫或者是父亲，
as a young man,
或者是年轻人，
how much do you pray?
你有多少次的祷告呢？
When you face difficulties,
当你面对难处
when
的
you
时
step
候，
into the role,
当你进入了岗位，
do you pray?
你是否有祷告？
I fear that fathers and husbands do not pray.
我担心这丈夫或父亲没有祷告。
We simply face the problem. The problem is here, my family. I am the man. I will solve this.
我只是面对这个问题，然后说我是这个男人，我要去解决这个问题。
Now, at this point, let me ask you. We have studied a lot about David's life. Ray,
在这时候，我要问你，就是我们学到关于大卫生活。
has David been through battles?
那么大卫是否有经过战争？
Many battles, right?
许多战争。
And David, with his small crew, also experienced great victories, right?
大卫与他小队也经历了胜利。
And in fact, you remember in verse 2 that we read,
我们记得从我们读过第2节，
the people acknowledge his battle skills.
这些人他承认也知道他作战的这些战术。
How would you feel if someone just praised you? Whoa, we remember how you lead us into battle, how you won battles, how you took care of us. You are such a great general.
如果人让你说你如何带领我们的，你是一个何等好的元帅，你会有如何的感觉？
Now the battle is here.
现在战争来了，
The temptation is, I will show you that I will be able to protect you.
这诱惑是就是你可能会说我要跟你显示我如何。
Come, all the experience that I had in the previous battle, let me show you what I can do for you, my people.
我的子民，我在之前所有的经历，在战争中，我现在要来表现给你看。
Right? As fathers, as husbands,
身为父亲或者丈夫的，
I'm very experienced.
我很有经验，
I'll show you how I'll take care of you, my family.
我会让你看到，甚至我会如何保护你的家人，
How I'm going to make our children what great.
我会如何使我们的孩子成为一个
How I'm going to make our family well off. comfortable?
会如何使我的家人就是很有钱，然后何等的舒服？
How I'm going to provide for you?
我会如何的供应给你？
Now, David was praised and he knew that he was good.
大卫得到称赞，他也知道他是一个很棒的，
And he just conquered the Jebusites, not easy.
他也刚刚占领了这个耶布士，
But notice that David prayed.
也要知道就是注意到大卫有祷告。
Fathers, husbands, do you pray for your family every day?
父亲、丈夫，你是否有为你的家人每
Do you
天
pray
祷
for
告
your child by name?
你是否有为着你的孩子借着他的
What do
名
you
来祷告？
pray for them about?
你为着他们祷告是什么？
Young men, the same. What do you pray for when you face challenges?
同样的年轻人，当你面对考验的时候，你祷告是什么？
Now, I said this many times.
我讲了很多次，
I've been reading movie reviews.
我在读这些戏的评语，
There's a new trend.
有一个新的这种潮流，
There's a new trend. What do you notice
有一个潮流，
about young people?
我们会注意到关于年轻人，
Young people are very smart.
年轻人很聪明，
Young people are the heroes.
年轻人是那个英雄，
They are ones that will save the world.
他们是那些会拯救世
They are
界
very
的人，
clever.
他们很聪明。
The adults are the dumbos.
这些成年人是这些英雄，
This is the trend.
这个是这些潮流，
Pushing the young people to feel I am able. I don't need God.
要使年轻人知道我可以，即使我没有神，
I don't need church to teach me.
我不需要教会来教导我。
Now, David was 30-year-old, very easy to be proud.
大卫那时候30岁也很容易骄傲，
But he was very careful.
可是他很小心，
That is a good place to start.
这是一个很好的开始的地方。
Whether you're going to have a child, whether you're going to get married, whether you're going to grow up into certain roles, whether you're going to serve in church in certain roles,
你是否有孩子要结婚，在教会里面服侍等，
this is what we must learn.
这是我们要学习的地方。
Prayer is real.
祷告是真实的，
Prayer is absolutely necessary.
祷告是完全的需要，
Don't take prayer lightly
Yeah,
as a father, as a husband.
不要轻看祷告，身为父亲或者丈夫的，
So that's a wonderful part. But the question is, we go on.
这个是很好的这个东西，可是我们要继续看。
David won the battle, we know, in verse 20.
我们知道在20节大卫战胜了，
But I want you to notice what David said.
我们要来注意看大卫说了什么。
David said, "The Lord hath broken forth upon my enemies before me as the breach of waters."
大卫说：“耶和华在我面前冲破敌人，如同水冲去一般。”
Now David says he saw the enemy and although David is the one who fought, but he said God was the one who came out like waters and just smashed his enemies.
大卫说：“虽然是他自己亲自去打仗，可是他却说耶和华在我面前冲破敌人，如同水冲去一般。”
Now verse 21, he burned their images.
21节，他就是将这些偶像毁坏撇在那里。
Two things we learn.
我们学到2点。
One, he really believed God is the one that helped him in his victories.
一就是他知道是神帮助他在他胜利当中，
That's very important.
这是很重要的。
When you begin to think that you are the one who's taking care of your family,
当你以为是你自己照顾你家人，
when you begin to think I'm the one who is doing my job well
当你以为
at work,
在工作上是你自己有好的工作表现的时候，
that's when we fall.
这也是那
But
时候。
here David burned their images.
可是在这里大卫他毁坏这些偶像。
Now many of the kings, when they win battles, they keep the idols.
许多王他们战胜的时候，他们就收留这些偶
So
像，
all these are good things.
这些是好的东西。
When you have victories,
当你有胜利的时候，
don't be surprised that with victories come idols.
不要很惊讶，说到你有胜利，你也会拥有这些
I
偶
want to
像。
say that again.
我要再次说，
With victories, it can accompany with idols.
有了胜利，你也会可能带来这些偶像。
Successes in life, you will see many temptations.
你在生活中有成功，你会带来很多的诱惑。
But 30-year-old young David, I hope we do better than him.
可是30岁的大卫，我希望我们能够比他有更好的
Now, but the
表现。
question is this.
问题是，
Is David sincere?
那么大卫是否诚恳？
A lot of us can say, oh, God, you are the one who gave us victory. But is it true? Is it really us?
很多人说神你是给我那胜利的，可是是否是真的是还是我们自己？
Now we read 22 to 25 together.
我们来一起读22到25。
Reading. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, Thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them, and come up over them against the mulberry trees. And let it be, when thou hearest the sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees, then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then shall the Lord go out before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. And David did so as the Lord had commanded him, and smote the Philistines from Geba unto Gazer. Do you think David was sincere? It was really David in his heart that said, God is the one who gives victory. I need to depend on God. Do you think David was sincere?
你觉得是不是大卫曾感到他说是神给他胜利，我需要依靠神的时候？
What do you think?
你觉得呢？
Can it turn? Why? Why do you think yes? He prayed the second time. And he obeyed God's command.
他祷告了2次，然后也遵行神的命令，所以他的答案是死。
Do you ever wonder how come the second time God gave him a totally different command? Do it differently? Go to the battle differently?
你是否有想，当他祷第2次的时候，为什么神给他不同的命令，当他去战争的时候？
The next test comes.
第2个考验来。
Will David really depend on God after victories after victories?
那么大卫在战胜一次过又一次的时候，他是否会继续依靠？
Now, in the area of wives, David did not obey God.
在关于他娶妻的地方，大卫没有遵行神。
But the question now, God will test him.
可是问题是，现在神会考他。
Well, thankfully, now God says, now do it this way. David can say, actually, look, I won. I know how to do it.
神也许会对大卫说：“你这样子做。”可是大卫对神说：“我自己做了，我也战胜。”
Now, we as fathers, as husbands, we can lip service. Oh, yes, God, we depend on you. God, we pray to you. Please help us.
我们身为丈夫或父亲，我们也许只是在嘴巴上说，就是主，我们依靠你等的事情。
But the test comes is when we begin to say our experience does not count.
当考验来的时候，我们要说，就是我们的经验根本不在我们眼里。
Whether our experience from our parents, from the world,
无论是我们对于从父亲那里或者世界哪来的
that seem to work.
这些看起来好像行得通，
But if God says this way, I will now just obey Him this way.
可是当神说你要这样子做的时候，我就单单这样子的去做。
I've learned a new commandment. I've learned a new thing that God expects me to do.
我学习了新的命令，然后我也学习了神要我做的事情。
No matter what I've experienced,
无论我经历什么，
I subject it to what God wants me to do.
我完全顺服在神要我做的事情下。
What is a growing Christian? I ask you.
我来问你，一位成长的信徒是怎么样的？
A growing Christian is one who always listens to God and say, God, what are the new things that I need to know about my life?
一位成长的信徒是一直听神，然后一直问我在生活中应该怎么样，
Now, not new doctrines, please.
不是新的教义，
Is God show me what I need to obey?
就是神你向我显示说我应该怎么样的做来遵行。
And when God shows,
当神向你显明的时
the
候，
growing Christian or the one that obeys God, he will say, all right, I've learned something new. Now I obey this.
成长的信徒应该说，现在我学习到新的，我应该要遵从。
David got new command. He simply obeyed.
大卫有新的命令，他就这样子单单的顺服了。
So David did well.
大卫也做得好。
The question we have to ask ourselves, what about us?
我们要问自己的问题是：那么我们自己又如何呢？
As you bring up your children,
你养育你的孩子，
as you lead your wife,
当你带领你的妻子，
as you grow up into manhood,
当你长大成为男人的时候，
you begin to hear God telling you, do this. This is a new thing that you begin to learn about sanctification for your family, for yourself.
你开始会听到神对你说这样子做，这是关于成圣的，然后你要为着自己或其他人。
God is taking you to the next level of growth.
神带领你进入另一个成长的阶段。
The question is, will you just say, no, my experience tells me that God, this is not necessary.
问题是你是否会这样子说？就是你的经验告诉我 是这样子的，然后主这些是不需要做的事情。
David did well. May we learn from that?
我们要从当中
You look at verse 25.
我们来看25节，
Good commentary.
有好的记载。
And David did so as the Lord hath commanded him.
大卫就遵着耶和华所吩咐的去行。
Now, then we have another incident that is going to happen.
我们将会看到另一件要发生的事情。
Now, by the way, there's one thing that we should learn here as well.
有一件我们要学习的也是，
The lesson is when God puts you in a task,
这功课是当神将你摆在一个任务当中，
when God moves you into a certain role, fatherhood, husband, being husband, growing up into manhood,
当神将你摆在一个岗位，像从丈夫，然后等要成为一个成年人等，
we must know that God will enable you to live that life.
我们要知道神会使你有能力过这种的生活，
As long as you trust Him and obey Him.
只要你信靠他，也遵从他。
See, David understood, I just became king.
大卫明白，他才刚刚。
Do you know the pressure of becoming king of Israel?
你是否知道成为这个以色列的王的这个压力？
He cannot fail.
他不可以失败，
He cannot lose battles. If he lose battles, people are affected.
他不可以在战争上失败，因为当他失败的时候，这些人民会受影响。
But because it was God, he perceived, he knew God was the one who made him king.
因为他知道是神使他成为王的。
Kenny, do you think it's by chance that you're going to be a father?
你是否知道你要成为父亲是偶然的？
By chance that you have so many, 3 children or 1 children or 2 children?
偶然的，我有就是一个孩子、2个孩子等。
Now, when God puts you in that role, whether it's church, God will enable you.
当神把你摆在一个岗位，无论是在教会，神会使你有能力。
God will make David win battles.
神会使大卫在战争中得到胜利。
David's only enemy is not the Philistines.
大卫唯一的敌人不是这些非利士人，
Your only enemy, my only enemy, is not the enemies out there.
你我唯一的敌人不是在外面的敌人，
It is ourselves.
而是我们自己。
Whether we will obey God,
我们是否会遵从神？
whether we will trust Him.
我们是否会
Do
依
you,
靠他？
do you trust that bringing up your child the way God desires of us in the Bible, being the husband as God desires us in the husband, when you obey that, do you believe that God will help you all the way?
你是否相信按照圣经养育孩子，或者是其他事情，你是否相信，当你这样子做的时候，神会使你有能力？
The mulberry tree was that test.
这个桑树就是这个考验。
Will David trust God wholeheartedly
那么大卫是否会全心的来相信神呢？
and obey Him?
也遵从他。
Just to hear wind, on the top of the tree.
只是在这个树上听到这个风声。
What kind of battle plan is that?
那么这个战术是什么样的战术？
Go and listen to the tree. When the tree rustle, okay.
去听这个树上的声音。
You know what it is to trust someone who tells you this kind of battle plan?
你是否能够相信一个跟你说这样子的战术的人？
You may look, if I bring my child this way from the Bible, I think he's not going to be very successful in life.
如果我按
Doesn't make sense, God.
如果我按照圣经这样子的养育孩子，他也许在生活中不会很成功。
If I be this kind of,
这个讲不通。
if I be this kind of worker at work, God, I don't think it's going to work.
如果我在工作上成为这样子的员工，神，我觉得这个是行不通。
Now, I have the great privilege to often hear testimonies.
我有一个很大的权柄在这里能够分享，
More than you all.
比你们更多。
Because people, they text me for prayer, I pray for them, then I ask them how are things, then they text me back and share how God delivered them.
因为神发短讯，他们发短讯给我，分享关于这些祷告事项等，然后他们也分享关于神如何帮助他们。
Actually, what they go through strengthened my faith also.
他们所经历的也坚固了信心。
There are many among us that really make very difficult decisions at work and in the home.
在当中有很多人，他们在家里或工作上做了很艰难的决定。
Simply because God say, be like that and do this and trust me.
只是因为神说你要这样子，然后这样子做，然后相信我。
Just listen to the rustling of the tree, that's enough.
你只是要听这个树上的声音就这么多。
And when they describe how God gives the victory and delivers them and help them,
他们说到他们如何经过这个苦难，然后神如何拯救他们的时候，
how spouses share how God's word has changed their family,
这些伴侣分享如何神的话语改变他们的家
simply
庭
because the head of the home obey.
单单是因为这一家之主他遵
It,
从了。
it often brings tears to my eyes. I'm not joking. I seldom cry, but that is something that always moved me.
不是开玩笑，但我看到这些使我流泪，我不是很常哭的人。
Now, to see God's children in their role as husband, as father,
看到神的孩子在这个岗位，身为丈夫或父亲，
as men or women working in the world,
当男人或女人在世上工作的时候，
totally trusting God. I tell you, sometimes the advice I give to them, I can only give them biblical advice. And I know that is going to be very difficult for them to do.
完全相信神，我知道我只能够按照圣经来教导他们，也是一个很艰难让他们要做的事情。
Sometimes I don't want to give that advice.
有时候我不要给这种的意见，
But I know I can't. If it's biblical, I will tell you what is biblical.
可是我不能，因为当我知道是符合圣经的，我必须要按照圣经来。
And I'll say, it's up to you.
然后说做不做就由你。
But you see it from God's word.
可是你要从神的话语。
And then the children see the father, the wife see the husband obey God. And then you see how God deliver, like David.
然后神的孩子看到他的丈夫、妻子等如何他们遵从神，然后我们看到神如何拯救，就好像大卫一样。
When you step up into the role as a husband, as a father, as someone taking certain roles at your workplace,
当你要进入成为父亲、丈夫等的时候，或者是一个人要进入工作岗位的时候，
when you totally yield yourself and trust God and obey Him at all cost,
当你完全的依靠神的时候，无论付出任何代价。
now the Philistines, the Bible says it was the host of the Philistines. In verse 24, means it is a great group, a huge group, a host of them. Verse 24.
这24节这里说到这个非利士人的军队，就是说到是一整队的这个非利士人。
God will enable you. You must believe that.
神会使你有能力，必须要相信。
There is no lesson that your children, that you keep doing in family devotion, that you say with your lips. There's no amount of lessons that I say with my lips to my wife is going to change them as much as when they see you live it.
当我一直说，或者是在家里做这样子的例子等，他们是活不出来，除非他们看到你活出来。
Now David could have just did what he did regarding marrying many wives here, but he did not.
大卫可以就是这样子像这里做的一样，就是娶很多妻子，可是他却没有。
Now there's a lesson to learn also.
这个也是要，
We are not perfect.
我们不是完美的，
We are not perfect.
我们不是完美的。
But don't let imperfection make you think that since I already committed that sin, then, never mind.
可是不要因着你的不完美，就好像说我已经陷入这个罪，就让它发生吧。
Well, let's move on.
我们继续来看。
So, that is a lesson that we learned. David prayed. David trusted God wholeheartedly. Now, young people, I'll ask you.
这个是我们学习到
Just
功
now-
课，就是大卫他全心的依靠。
Just now, someone was sharing with me at dinner.
刚才在晚餐的时候，有人跟我分享，
He said he used to feel very unhappy coming to church on Sundays
他说他曾经在星期天要来教会的时候感到不
because he said I could do more homework.
因为他说我可以
If I
做
don't
更
come.
多的功课，如果不来的话，
If I don't go and serve, I could have more time to do schoolwork.
如果不服侍的话，我有更多时间来做学校功课。
But then finally, a brother advised him. He said, trust God.
最后有一个弟兄，他跟他说你要相信神，
God says, spend the Sabbath day holy. You trust Him and He will help you.
神说你要使这个安息日圣洁，然后你相信他，他会帮助你。
And the person said when he started to do that,
当那个人他分享，当他开始这样子做的
he
时候，
began to feel the joy.
他开始感到这个喜乐，
He began to experience increase in faith in God's help.
他开始经历到他在信心上成长，来经历神的帮助。
We must experience that
我们必须要经历到这
when we
些。
step into roles.
当我们进入某些岗位的时候，
You see, everything that God allows when you step into the role is He is slowly molding, and strengthening you.
当你进入某个岗位的时候，神是在那边一直陶造你。
If you and I fail, then we will never grow to the next stage of faith.
当你跟我失败的时候，我们无法进入这个信心成长的另一个阶段。
Ignatius, you just came to know the Lord and you're growing. Very happy, right?
Ignatius, 你刚刚认识神，然后你也在属灵上成长，你很喜乐。
Very soon you will face, if not, you already face many tests that will come your way.
很快，或者是你已经要经历很多的考验。
As you step up to be a stronger Christian,
当你要成为一个更成长坚强的这个信徒的时候，
tests will come.
这个考验会来。
But you learn from David.
可是你从大卫身上学习，
Trust God wholly.
要完全相信神。
The proof of trust is prayer.
这个相信的证明就是接着祷告，
Right?
是吗？
I say again, the proof of your trust is prayer.
这个信心的证明就是接着祷告。
One of the definition of prayer is dependence on God.
一个祷告的定义就是你要依靠神。
When you don't pray, when I don't pray means I don't need to depend on God.
如果你跟我不祷告，意思就是说我们不依靠神。
Now let us move
那我们继续看，
next quickly.
很快的。
So these are the two things we learn.
这个是我们学习。
What about the fetching of the ark? Now, after this, David gathered the people, 30,000 of them in chapter 6 to go and fetch the ark.
那么关于接这个约柜，说到大卫才派了3万个人来接这个约柜。
Now they picked up the ark, they were very happy.
他们就是他们接到了这个约柜，然后他们也开心。
In chapter 6 verse 5, they played many instruments.
第6章第5节说到他们玩很多乐器。
And then as they were moving, we know in chapter 6 verse 6, let's read verses 6 and 7
当
together.
他们在前进的时候，我们来读第6章第6到第7节，一起来读。
Reading. And when they came to Nakon, threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and he died before the ark of God. Now read verse 8 and 9 together also.
我们也一起来读8跟9节。
And David was displeased because the Lord hath made a breach upon Uzzah. And he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, How shall the ark of the Lord come to me? Now, I ask, what can we learn from here?
我问我们从这里可以学到什么？
David became king.
大卫成为了王，
He stepped into the role.
他进入这岗位，
Now he wants to fetch the ark.
现在他要接这个约柜。
What is it about?
这是说到什么呢？
What do you think, Joshua?
周说你觉得是什么呢？
Why did he want to fetch the ark?
为什么他要抬或者接这个约柜？
The ark wasn't in Jerusalem.
Yes? Yes, because he wanted the presence of the Lord to be in Jerusalem.
因为他要神的同在在这个耶路撒冷。
Remember, the ark in the Old Testament is always signifying the presence of God among his people.
要知道，在旧约提到约柜，就是说到这个神与他的人民同在。
So first thing,
第一点，
for David to step into the role, he won many battles already, but yet he want to pick up the ark.
对于大卫，他在很多战争上胜利，他也要接这个约柜。
Kenny Chia, what do you think we can learn from here?
你现在你觉得我们从这里可以学到什么？
Presence of the Lord is important.
The presence of the Lord is very important.
神的同在很重要。
Now remember this, has David been winning battles?
要记得，那么大卫是否他在战争中胜利？
When he prayed, did not God answer him?
他拿祷告的时候，神有没有回应他？
Isn't that good enough?
这不是已经够好了吗？
Was not good enough for David.
对大卫来说还不够好。
The significant presence of the Lord was what David wanted for the people.
这个神的同在的重要性是大卫要他人民知道的。
It was not simply about winning battles and God helping him.
不是单单在战争中胜利，然后神帮助他，
God's presence.
是神的同在。
Now, if you were David, you say pretty good already, right?
如果你是大卫的话，你会说已经够好了。
Why go through this trouble?
为什么我还要经过这些的苦
The,
难呢？
the Lord's presence, the Lord's presence.
神的同在，
He was so happy when he saw the ark.
他何等的高兴，当他看到约柜的时候
He，was so happy to be able to bring the ark back.
他很高兴，当他可以将这个约柜抬回去的时候。
The people in the past didn't really seem to care.
在以前的人好像不管这些事情。
David gathered the people and said, let's go get the ark.
大卫召集人，然后说我们去接或抬这个约柜。
Now, when we step into roles, when we become fathers, become husbands, grow up, or become certain positions at work,
当我们进入岗位，身为父亲、丈夫等，或者是在工作上的时候，
please don't just say, God help me, help me, help me, do this, do that, do this, do that.
请不要只是说神你帮助我做这个做那个。
See, to David, God's presence meant everything in life.
对大卫来说，在他生活中，神的同在是一切。
Later, you see the way he rejoiced to have God's presence with them.
之后我们会看到他何等的高兴，当神与他们同在。
God has been answering his prayer already.
神已经回应他祷告了。
Now, in your walk and my walk,
在你跟我的与神同行当
is
中，
it all about God? You make me Father, help me, that's it.
是不是只是说主你帮助我成为父亲？
Or is
这
it
样子，
your personal walk, personal presence of God in your life that you really treasure and you seek after?
还是你珍惜或者寻求神在你个人的生活当中的同在？
See, that was David.
这个是大卫，
You become a manager,
你成为一个这个总管理，
you get promoted.
你升级，
What goes through your mind?
那么你想的是什么呢？
God, please, since you make me in this position, please keep helping me to be successful.
既然神使你进入这个岗位，求神你帮助我能够成功，
Or is it, God, please be very close to me.
还是你会说神，请你跟我很亲近，
I want to worship you.
我要敬拜你，
I want to serve you.
我要服侍你，
I want to make offerings to you.
我要向你奉献。
That's why they went to get the ark.
这是为什么他们去抬这个约
It
柜，
was not just about being king and being helped.
不是单单只是成为一个皇帝，或者是得到帮助。
With the ark there, they will worship God. They will offer to him. It's a very real thing to them.
有一个约柜的话，他们可以向神敬拜，或者是向神奉献，对他们来说是一个很真实的事情，
So that is a good thing.
这是一个好的事情。
Is God's presence very important to you?
那么神的同在是否对你来说很重要呢？
Now, but there was failure also, right? Uzzah died.
可是也有失败的地方，就是乌撒他死了。
What do we learn?
我们学到什么？
This is a very common lesson.
这个是很普遍，或者是我们很常学到。
Alan, we did 2 Samuel. What is the lesson here?
觉得我们学到撒母耳记下，我们这里学到什么呢？
David was not careful.
大卫不小心，
But David was presumptuous. But he was, the but. Huh? Very good. David was very sincere, isn't it?
是大卫以为，然后他也是很诚恳。
Now, we can be very sincere as fathers, as husbands, as men.
我们身为丈夫父亲、男人，我们可以是很诚恳，
That is good.
是好的，
That is necessary.
也是很有需要的。
But in our sincerity, we must make sure that we're not presumptuous.
可是，在我们诚恳当中，我们不应该做出。
Don't simply think that I'm very sincere father, I'm very sincere husband, and God is pleased.
我们不要以为我们是一个很诚恳的丈夫父亲等，然后神就喜悦。
David did not handle the ark as God required.
大卫没有按照神要的方式来处理这个约柜。
The transportation of the ark must, or rather the handling of the ark, has always been by the priests.
处理约柜是应该借着这些祭司来做的，
So that is another thing we must learn.
这是另一个我们要学习的功课。
Doesn't mean that God, I want to serve you, God, I want to do this and do that for you as a husband, as a father.
不是说到神我要服侍你，我要为你做这点那点身为父亲或丈夫，
As a person at work, God, I want to do this for you.
在工作上的人，你不是说主我要为你做这件事情。
We must have the highest reverence of what God expects
我们要
in our
对
service.
我们要对我们 神期盼我们对他的服侍中带有敬虔的心。
Now that's why when we serve in church,
当我们在教会服侍的时候，
anyone who is in session, who are in committees, we all feel this pressure.
哪一位在长职或者是委员里面，我们都会感到这样子的压力。
We sincerely want to serve God, but we are afraid to be Uzzahs.
我们很诚恳的要服侍神，可是我们很怕成为乌撒。
So the story is the ark almost toppled, right?
故事是这个约柜它几乎要倒了。
Joash, what did Uzzah do?
就他乌撒他做了什么事情？
What did Uzzah do?
乌撒他做了什么事情？
He tried to stabilize it.
他试着要去扶那约，
No one was allowed to touch the ark.
没有人允许可以去碰这个约柜。
Uzzah tried to help, right?
乌撒他只是想要帮忙。
Do you think it's very bad?
Yeah.
God struck him dead?
你觉得神他将他刺死是不是一件不
What do you
好的事
think?
情？你觉得呢
Felix,
，Felix？
you think God is very bad?
你觉得神是很坏的？
Actually, I think God he must have his mind, but
讲华语。
我认为上主这样做肯定是有他的原因的，但是究竟什么我
Okay, I know God did this. Definitely, there's a reason, but I don't fully understand the reason. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, yes. So now we must. Let me say, if Uzzah didn't hold the ark will fall down on the floor, right?
如果乌撒没有扶这个约柜，这个约柜就会倒在地上。
So if you don't do something as father,
如果我们身为父亲不做一些事，
as husband,
身为丈夫，
something bad is going to happen. Our child have no education, or they may not be, or they may not advance, or we may not have money.
其实不好的事情要发生，就好像孩子他得不到他的教育等。
Say Uzzah thought I should do something.
乌撒觉得他需要做一些事情，
David also involved the wrong people.
大卫也牵涉了不对的人。
Claude, what do you think? Do you think that Uzzah should have put out his hand to help the ark?
说你觉得呢？那乌撒是否要伸手去扶这个约柜？
What if he didn't?
如果他没有的话呢，
It will fall.
他就会倒了。
Are you sure?
你肯定吗？
Maybe it will fall.
也许
Maybe
他
not.
会倒，也许不会倒。
Have you seen something like almost going to fall and then didn't fall?
你是否有看过一些东西要倒，看起来要倒，可是却没有倒？
Can God not himself push it back up?
那么神自己不能够将这个约柜扶起来吗？
When we serve God, we must always remember God, this is God's things. God will take care of it.
当我们服侍神的时候，我们要记得这是神的事情，他会照顾的。
When we bring up our family, we bring our children, when we work at work, just do it God's way.
当我们照顾我们孩子家庭的时候，我们要按照神的方式去。
Even if it looks like it's not going to be good for your children, but it's very clear in scriptures, we obey.
虽然看起来对你的孩子不好，可是圣经里面提到我们要遵从。
You think God cannot solve that toppling problem?
你觉得神不能够解决这个要倒的这个问题吗？
God hang the whole earth in space.
神将整个地球放在这宇宙中，
The ark is not heavier than this world.
这个约柜不比这个世界
We
地球重。
must have faith, do things God's way.
我们需要有
As a
信心
father, as a husband, as a person at work.
身为父亲等我们需要有信心做神的方式。
Sincerity is not the only thing.
诚恳不是唯一的东西，
Obedience.
我们需要顺服遵从
Obedience.
听话。
So, because of David's failure to be careful, someone died.
因这大卫失败，为了要小心有人死了。
Now, actually, if David did the right thing, Uzzah would not be involved, Uzzah would not die, right?
如果大卫做对的事情，他没有牵涉乌撒，乌撒就不会死。
When we are not careful, when we step into roles, we are not careful,
如果我们进入某些岗位没有不小心的话，
we can affect lives.
我们会影响生命。
When you as father, husband, as a person at work, you are not careful, you can impact someone's life negatively.
当你在成为父亲、丈夫或者在工作上的人，如果你不小心的话，你会影响某些人生。
Or talk about those in relationship, Alan.
或者谈那些在
Who else have girlfriend?
没有其他人
Right?
有女朋友的。
Whatever as men we do, we must be very, very careful.
身为男人，无论我们做什么，我们需要很小心。
Now you realize this, right?
你知道这一点，
Your children cannot buy that thing, cannot go there, cannot have that unless you give them money, unless you buy it for them, unless you drive them there.
你的孩子不能够买这些或者去到某些地方等，除非你给他钱，或者是你载他去那个地方。
And if you do not obey God at all costs, you think, no, this is all right.
如果你没有想尽办法去遵从神的时候，然后你觉得是对的。
I'm very sincere as a father, as a husband, as a leader at work, in church.
我身为丈夫或者父亲或者在教会的领袖的岗位中，我是很诚恳的。
Uzzah would not have been there.
乌撒不会在那里，
Your children would not have been there.
你的孩子也不会在那里，
They would not have had that thing
他们不会有那一个
that
东
you
西，
spend money to buy for them.
就是你花钱去买的东西。
We can affect lives when we are in a certain role, in a certain position. Know the responsibility.
那我们在某些岗位，我们会影响人，我们需要知道这个责任。
So David pass and fail.
所以大卫他及格还是不及格？
Let us learn to be careful.
让我们学习要小心。
Now, then the last part.
最后一个部分，
Maybe I'll leave chapter 7 to the next round,
也许我会在下一次才讲第7章，
but we just do this part.
我们只是来看这个部分。
Now, David failed, and then he realized that he need to use the right process that God said to move the ark.
大卫失败了，然后他才知道他需要用正确的方式，就是神所要的来接这个约柜。
And then in verse 11, 3 months later, he did the right thing,
然后在11节说到3个月他做对的事情，
and he was very happy.
然后他很高兴，
No problems this time.
这一次没有问题，
All right, obey God, no problems.
遵从神没有问题。
Then David danced before the ark in verse 14,
然后14节说到大卫在约柜面前跳舞，
and then he removed his garments.
然后他将他的衣服脱下来。
Now look at verse 16. Shall we read chapter 6, verse 16 together?
我们来读第6章16节。
And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. And she despised him in her heart. Now the wife. All right, husband? Sometimes you do something, then your wife look at you and she despises you.
现在是说到妻子对于丈夫们，当你做一些事情的时候，你的妻子轻视你。
Right? So now, why did let's go one step at a time. Now,
一次来看一件事情，
so she was very upset.
她很不开心。
Let's read verse 20 to 22. Let's read together.
我们一起来读20到22节。
Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants. And one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovered himself. And David said unto Michal, It was before the Lord which chose me, before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will play before the Lord, and I will yet be more vile than this, and will be abased in my own sight. And the men servant which thou hast spoken of them shall I behead in honor. You know, because of this, Michal did not have a baby.
因着他做这件事情，米迦没有孩子，
God cursed her.
神诅咒他。
Now, so I ask, what do we learn from here?
我问我们从这里学到什么？
What do we learn from here as husbands?
我们从这里学到什么？丈夫们，
Adrian, what do you learn as a husband?
你觉得你身为丈夫，你学到什么？
Before God, we are still nothing.
Before God, we are nothing. Which verse?
在神面前我们什么都不是。那这是哪一节提到呢？
It said, verse 21, therefore will I play before the Lord.
And then verse 22, I'll be more vile than this, right? Now,
21跟22节提到。
notice that he said God appointed him.
要注意看到就是神说就是神拣选了他。
Now he said, God appointed me in this role, I stepped into this role.
他说神拣选我，所以我就进入这岗位。
David, a man stepping into this task
大卫身为一个男人接了这一个任务，
that God appointed for him.
就是神为他所预备的。
But yet he says, I am nothing before God. I will be baser than nothing.
然而他却说我在神面前什么都不是。
This is something that we must learn when we step into any role.
这个是我们必须要学习的。当我们进入什么岗位的
Goes back to lesson 1. I'm just an instrument.
回到第一课，我们只是一个器皿。
What am I?
我是什么？
Do you really feel that way?
你是否真的也有这样子的感
As a
觉？
father, as a husband, as a manager at work?
身为父亲、丈夫，或者是在工作上的总管。
So good. What else do we learn?
好的，那么我们又学到什么呢？
What was the wife really saying?
这个妻子真的到底在说什么？
Moray, what was the wife saying?
他妻子在说什么呢？
Can speak in Mandarin.
大卫感到为大卫感到羞耻。I think my
他觉得大卫
很羞耻。
很羞耻. All right. The wife felt that David was very shameful, his behavior. Okay. So what is he really saying?
那么他到底在说什么呢？
Joe, what do you think he was? No, Joe not married. Pei, what was the wife really saying to David?
所以他妻子到底在跟大卫说什么？
In which David shamed her as well.
Very good. David embarrassed her.
大卫使他蒙羞。
David, do you know what position you are? King, you know?
大卫，你是否知道你的地位？你是一个皇帝，
And I'm your wife.
然后我是你的妻子，
We are royalties.
我们是王主。
How can you take off your kingly robes and act like just another ordinary citizen?
你怎么样可以将你的王袍除去，然后好像一个平民一样，
And become part of them?
然后成为他们的一部分？
You are distinct from you are king. You shame me also. You embarrass me.
你是一个皇帝，你应该跟他们不同，你使我蒙羞。
We are dignities.
我们有尊严，
Now sometimes we are like that.
有时候我们也是这样子。
We feel that when we step into certain role, we have certain dignified or dignity, honor, and we said, no, this must be how people view me and uphold me.
当我们进入某些岗位，我们有一些的尊严，说到其他人应该这样子的来看我。
Now, but actually, this is a husband and wife situation.
可是其实这是一个丈夫与妻子之间的这情形。
What if your wife one day say, husband,
如果你的妻子有一天说丈夫，
how can you take a job like that?
你怎么可以接受一份这样子的工？
It embarrasses us.
它使我们蒙羞。
Maybe you run out of a job.
也许你没有工，
And then the only job is jobs that make you break the Sabbath.
然后唯一的工就是使你不守安息日。
They say, I will keep the Sabbath. They're holy.
然后你说我要守安息日时
Nothing
守
so,
日
all right, I work in McDonald's.
然后你说我在麦当劳，
I won't say KFC.
我不会说在 KFC。
And then your wife said, how can you take a job? Come on. It embarrasses us as a family.
你说怎么可以接受这样子的工？它使你的家庭蒙羞。
You are in the role of a husband, as a father.
你是一个丈夫或者是父亲的这个岗位，
As long as this is not a job that is sinful.
只要这不是一个就是罪恶的这一份
It's an
工，
honest job.
是一个很诚实的一份工。
Is there anything wrong with taking it?
那么你接受这份工是否有错呢？
See, David responded correctly to his wife.
大卫对他的妻子有正确的回应。
Don't be surprised one day you will face this test in your family,
不要惊讶，有一天你在你家庭中也会面对这样子的考验。
where your wife or your children
当你的妻子或孩子
is going to put you in a position where you have to choose.
将你摆在一个情况下，就是你需要做出选择。
And they even use things that would begin to make you think, yeah, that is quite embarrassing for us.
他们甚至会用一些东西使你觉得这些对我们来说是蛮羞耻的，
Because we used to live like that.
因为我们曾经这样子的过活。
Because our children are used to be viewed like that in church or in school or wherever.
因为我们的孩子曾经被可能在学校、教会等这样子的被看待。
It's too embarrassing for us to step down, remove our kingly robes.
对于我们来说是很蒙羞的，当我们要低下头，然后将我们的王袍脱去，
How are you going to respond?
你会做出怎么样的回应呢？
Will you fold under that pressure?
你是否也会陷在这种的压力下？
Well, this was a very difficult test for David.
这个是对大卫来说是一个很难的这种考验。
The most difficult test always comes from your loved ones, right?
最难的考验很常都是从你的亲人来的，不是吗？
Are you very concerned of what people think of you, your social status?
你是否会担心其他人怎么看待你？
Your family social status?
你家人在社会上的地位？
If you are, then when you step into that role, you'll be in danger.
如果你是的话，当你踏进这个岗位，你会有危机。
You will likely not respond like David.
你很可能不会像大卫一样子的做出这样子。
Remember, David was only 30 years old.
要记得，大卫只是30岁。
He started off very clear. God made me merely an instrument.
他一开始的时候，他就知道神使他只是成为一个器皿。
At the end, he will respond correctly.
到最后，他会做出正确的回应。
Maybe you take on certain leadership position in church.
也许你在教会就是你当了一些领袖的岗位，
At work,
在工作。
is there anything that is beneath you? I cannot do that. Oh, I cannot help to clean tables. I cannot help to shift. I am church leader, you know.
一些比较低微的工作你会说我是领袖，我不能够这样子做，好像你要做清理的工作的。
I'm father, you know. I don't do these things.
我是父亲，难道你不知道吗？我不能够这样子做。
Then very soon we will make decisions that will be based on whether we remain dignified in the eyes of people.
很快的，我们会做出这种的决定，就是我们是否在人的眼里还有这个尊严。
So here are a few things that we learn from David's life.
这里我们从大卫的生活或生命当中学了几样的东西。
30 years old, stepping into this role, not easy.
30岁搭进这个岗位不容易。
All of us, God calls us to something.
我们每一位神呼召我们是有一些目的。
Maybe God is calling you to something.
也许神呼召你是有在为了某些目的当中。
I hope some of these lessons we remember.
我希望这些功课我们能够记得。
Let's summarize very quickly and then we break up.
我们很快的总结，然后
Oh, never mind. You summarize in your group.
或者你在你小组里面
Right?
做
We got about 15 minutes.
我们大概有15分钟。
Let's close in prayer first.
我们先以祷告结束。
Let's pray. We will cover 13 key well-known denominations.
我们要讲到3个比较驰名的宗派，13个，
Their timeline and how they split.
他们的时间线，还有他们怎么样分出来，
How the groups form.
他们是怎么样组成的。
Okay, so